right, so the question now is why do we study the Bible? So that's kind of two parts. What is the ultimate goal of studying the Bible, and what do we expect to happen when we study the Bible? Primarily, I want to focus on.
I don't understand.
Sorry, Siri. What is the ultimate goal of studying the Scriptures? So, throw out some thoughts. We're going to write them on the whiteboard.
Well, to be in the Word, and that way, in a better relationship with the Word.
Spend time with God.
It's similar to
Knowledge. What did you say, David?
I was going to say it's like personally getting to know God better, I guess, which is kind of a squish together of those two. Yeah,
right.
But yeah.
How many sets of papers are here? Like,
I think there's 6 total. So the actual page number, there's like 5. Is there 5 in there? So it's a table, a 1-page table, a 1-page outline, a 2-page story, and I can't remember what else. Oh, and the resources.
Yeah, 5 pages.
All right. Why else do we study the Bible? What's the goal?
To arm yourself for witnessing.
I think there's 2 answers in that one: witnessing and arming yourself.
Yeah, for defense and offense.
Any other thoughts?
So many of them I feel like peel off of knowledge,
Yeah.
like history, growing in faith, and all of that kind of springs out of knowledge.
Faith.
Just reminded that when we looked at being reminded of the origin of where we came from. So,
Reminder like that.
Oh, couldn't history? You said history, but seriously, because it is a historical.
Yeah.
So to know history.
Yeah. Learn Jewish history, learn Christian history, which are both mingled together.
I've used it at times for health, knowing how to explain why we rest one day a week, and just practical things, how to take care of yourself.
Does wisdom fall under any of those categories? Because health would be, I don't know.
Any final thoughts? My goal was to write this on the board originally, so if you look at the second page I gave you, it should be an outline. Yeah, the one that looks like this. It has blanks on it. Yeah.
How to study the Bible from the top. Nope, they all have that. My bad.
So what we're looking at should be the first blank, right? Yeah, the point of reading the Bible. We're going to fill in that blank. I'm going to give you my definition, and we're going to talk about it a little bit. So just cording this off. The aim or the purpose or the point of reading the Bible is to see the glory of God until the Church of Christ is complete in beauty and number. To see the glory of God until the Church of Christ is complete in beauty and number. One more time, that's our purpose. What we're going to say, our stated purpose for this class is we study the Bible. Our aim in studying the Scriptures is to see the glory of God until the Church of Christ is complete in beauty and number. Think about that for a second. First of all, X is the Greek letter representing Christ, in case that's... what is here, but more importantly, what's missing from this? Or what's confusing about that? Or why would I call this our aim? Just give me your thoughts on that statement.
I guess my first observation is that it seems like it's inactive.
Inactive.
We're seeing the glory of God.
Okay.
As if it's observation, not necessarily active.
Good. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Okay. Were you gonna say something else?
I was just going to say I'm kind of curious on the fact that it's finite as well, meaning it has an end.
Ooh.
And I'm curious what the Word of God's impact is in eternity.
I don't know how to answer that question, but there is an intentional skipped step, at least one skipped step in this purpose statement. I made it as simple as possible so that we could remember it, because we're going to review this every week if I remember. But what David pointed out is there's something missing, which is, it just seems like it is this, it's a passive action. It's just, there's not much to it. What's missing is between this step and this step. Because so we open our Bibles, we're looking to see the glory of God. The question is, how does that result in the Church of Christ being complete in beauty and number? And the answer is the very active step of enjoying, there's pleasure in there, sharing, transformation, growth within yourself. So there are steps in between these two things. So what I wanted to point out by making this first very simple, overly simplistic, was the bookmarks, the very beginning and the very end. The very beginning is that we start by looking at the Scriptures to see the glory of God. The very end, which is Harvest's mission statement, the health and size of God's church, is the growth of the church in beauty and number, health and size. So now we're going to look at where I kind of stole and molded that purpose statement from with your very next blanks. So we started with my definition, my purpose statement of reading the Bible. Now we're going to deal with Piper's, who says our ultimate goal in reading the Bible is that God's infinite worth and beauty would be exalted in the everlasting white-hot worship of the blood-bought bride of Christ from every people, language, tribe, and nation.
My glass is better. Hey, everybody.
All right, I'm coming.
Come on in.
Lost family.
Actually, this is a lot of one family here. I'm just saying hello.
I was gonna say, which
Give them
one?
heavy. Is it hot? Are you guys hot in here?
No.
Not yet.
Not yet. You're gonna be. Wait till it gets going.
So the door open. Missed a couple words in there.
Okay, so our ultimate goal in reading the Bible is that God's infinite worth and beauty would be exalted in the everlasting white-hot worship of the blood-bought bride of Christ from every people, language, tribe, and nation. I think I included a resources page in what I gave you. It's probably the last page. That comes from... Oh, I might not... I don't remember if I have it on there, actually. That comes from Piper's book called Reading the Bible Supernaturally. So that's his definition of why we read. Yeah, go ahead.
Tribe, language.
People, language, tribe, nation.
We don't have any more papers, right?
No. Well, yes, one.
One set.
No. Oh yeah, the draft copy. So Piper breaks that down into the 6 points that follow, and so he explains the steps that are missing in between these two things. So the very first thing, let me find where I wrote all this down. Boy. Jesus. Okay. The very first point is that the ultimate value and excellence of the universe is God's glory. So the point that he's saying is the thing that is ultimately important in the world is God's glory. We're going to look at that in a text a little bit later. But so he's going through a very logical chain of explaining his purpose statement, and hopefully our purpose statement. So number 2 is the ultimate aim of God's work is the authentic and intense worship of his glory. So we start with his glory. The next aim is our worship. So we should see his glory, and then that should lead to worship. The third thing is we should always read to see this glory. See this glory. So we start with glory. We go to worship. Our aim should be to see that glory. So that, the next one, we should aim to savor his glory above all things. We're not just seeing it. We're not just seeing something wonderful. We're not just seeing a beautiful landscape or something that makes us feel good. We're savoring it. We're enjoying it. We're taking pleasure in that. And then we should aim to be transformed. And I think this is a big point of what David was saying. We should aim to be transformed by this seeing and savoring into the likeness of his beauty. So we don't just see something, we see it and take pleasure in it. We don't just see it and take pleasure in it, we see it and take pleasure so that we can be changed, transformed. He says that. So that more and more people would be drawn into God's family until Christ's bride, across all centuries and cultures, is complete in number and beauty. So, what he's saying is, the way that we view the Scriptures, and what part of this is saying, the way that we view the Scriptures is we start by seeing God's glory, and then we move to worship. The goal of God's glory in the Scriptures is worship. So we have to first see that, we have to then savor it or enjoy it. Then we are changed, transformed, we grow by that. And then ultimately the goal is the health and size of God's church, which comes in when we share what we've learned. This is like, theoretically, these are the steps that Mike goes through to preach a sermon. He's preparing a sermon. He sees what's good about God in this. And then he himself has to learn to enjoy it, to appreciate it, to see it new so that he can communicate it well.
Man.
Is this a wardrobe?
And
then he himself has to be changed by the Word so that when he communicates it, he's communicating from his change, from his joy, from his pleasure, to get others to enjoy God, to see God, and to be changed by God. Okay, does that make sense? No, it's a little heady. I'm going to explain why in a second. Okay, so now we're going to go to the page with the table on it. We're going to look at our syllabus. That was a long way of introduction to talk about this purpose statement. So looking at that table, the syllabus looks like this. This is the layout of what all 8 weeks are going to be like. We might change something. I don't know, given the amount of people that just emailed me and said that they couldn't make it tonight. So we might slow down the next one. We're going to figure out how to do that for their sake, but we'll see. But this class, as I wrote, I wrote it. I wrote it on here. Yeah. So looking at both the syllabus and the outline of the page that we were just writing on, this class, as in today, is going to be a lot more theoretical. It's going to be a lot more information. But by the end, we're going to get to practical, as in like probably the last 10 minutes. And from there, then on out, classes 2 through 7 are going to be entirely practical. What we're going to do is we're going to take 1 or 2 passages and we're just going to look at them. We're going to learn from them together. Some of them I'll tell you to study as homework, but we're not going to be learning like this. We're going to be learning from the scripture itself. And I think for everyone it's a lot more enjoyable because this is a little wordy. So class 1 is theoretical, classes 2 through 7 are a little bit more practical, and then class 8 is an optional class. I mean, I guess technically all of these are optional, but the point of that one, it's going to be a lot more technical. It's going to be sentence diagramming, and there's a method called Bible arcing. If you are really into like logistics and math and organization, this is going to resonate well with you. If English grammar is not your thing, this is going to be a challenge. I'm not saying don't come, I'm saying prepare your brain, because that class is going to be different than the rest of them. The rest of them should be pretty exciting, a lot more fun for those of you that don't like diagramming. That's why I made the last class the way that it is. So some of the expectations you can see on that right side of the table, the homework for each week. The first 3 weeks, again, is just going to be studying a passage. So tonight into next week, we're just going to be studying 4 verses, Proverbs 6, 16 to 19. Dad, that's the section that you and Mike started studying together. So we're going to look at it probably the last 10 minutes today, but then my encouragement is going to be to keep looking at it throughout the week as much as possible, give it as much time as possible, and then we're going to look at it more when we get back to class, and then we're going to kind of debrief and go from there. And that's what the first 3 weeks are going to look like. If you notice, class 4 for the homework is a word study. Now I realize I didn't print out for you, or I didn't copy the word study list, because it's a mess. But if you want to pass it around, this is what it's going to look like when I give it to you. That is a word study list. The words in bold are going to be words that you choose from. And during the class, we're going to walk through how you would do a word study in the scriptures. You can choose one of those words, and it has suggested questions and notes for how to go about the word study. So that's going to be your homework for week 4. And I'm going to ask that at least some people, for at least like a minute, share what they learned. It's not like very little pressure. If you're not comfortable speaking in front of people, I'm not going to force you probably. I don't know, we'll see. But it's not going to be, there's going to be very little pressure for that one. The point is just to get you to see new things and also see what kind of questions you might have as a result of trying a word study. And then class 5, or after class 5, the homework will be just reading the book of Revelation once. And then if you notice, class 7, the content of class 7 is going to be presentations. I know that's a big word. It's not as intense as it seems. So the homework the week before is going to be preparing for that presentation. This paper has the list that I've suggested of sections that you can study. Only one of them is 4 verses long. The rest of them are 3 or less. So it's like very little text. The goal is, and here's some more suggested questions on that one. The goal will be that by class 7, we'll all come together, and again, for at least 1 minute, you share something that amazed you with the rest of the class in those verses. So it's just, we're all going to put in a bunch of time on something, on one of those texts, and then we're going to present for as long as you're comfortable. You don't even have to stand up, you can sit at your seat, but just share what you learned in your time studying those 2, 3, or 4 verses. Okay? Any questions on that? I realize now, as I say it, it sounds way more daunting than it is. I promise we'll build up to this. Any questions or thoughts on that? feel like you got it over your head coming to this class?
Mhm.
Yes.
Rebrain.
Okay.
I think you should have a PowerPoint piece with it.
Yeah, well, I went simpler, and even that didn't work out. So, the whiteboard's here. All right, and yeah, like I said, the last class will be, there will be no homework after class 7. Class 8, we're just going to be walking through diagramming and arguing together. It's way more exciting than it sounds, I promise. Okay, so, well, unless it sounds exciting to you, then it's exactly as exciting as it sounds. The reason that I enjoy this class is because this was the kind of thing that like completely changed our time in India for me. Specifically, when I first met Happy, we did 6 months of him teaching me language for 4 hours a day, and then for an hour or two us studying the Bible together. And it was incredible. And we got to the end of the 6 months, and someone asked him to come help him. One of my friends asked Happy if Happy could come and help him start a business. And so I was like, okay, Happy and I have basically studied, most of you were here for the summer class. We did Progress of Redemption together. That's what we did for those 6 months, which I crammed into 8 weeks last time. But I was like, okay, I want to teach Happy how to be able to study the scriptures when he's on his own. He's going to be away from his family. He's going to be with another family, but I don't expect them to feed him spiritually a whole lot. So I started reading Piper's Reading Your Bible Supernaturally, and it's like this 400-page book, and the first 350 pages are what we're going to talk about today, which is seeing the glory of God, which is not at all what I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn practical tips on how to teach Happy how to study the scriptures. And in that time, Piper reminded me that I was missing a very important first step, which is my relationship with God through His Word. And so learning that lesson the hard 350-page way was a crucial first step. And then Happy and I started doing the process that we're about to go through. And it just it bonded us like crazy. And it made me realize how much I had been missing in my time studying scriptures. And what came out of that was writing a curriculum for Reggie and Shogun, writing a What is the Healthy Church program that our plan was to walk Reggie, Shogun, and their teams through for 2 years, which we didn't end up finishing because of COVID. And everything that you've seen through Crave, me leading Crave, that was a result of this time. The few times that I've preached, that was a result of this time. Everything stemmed out of this. So again, I know this is theory and some of this seems boring right now. When we get into it, it's going to be incredible. It really did change my life in a very important way. So I'm excited to get there. Okay, I think... Any questions on what I've said up to this point, or expectations, or anything like that? Okay. You guys all come back next week. All right, so we're going to do that in a sort of practical way right now. We are going to study Isaiah 6. So this is going to be brief, admittedly, but I'll explain why we're doing it after, or maybe during. So Isaiah 6, we're going to look at the whole chapter. There's only 13 verses. David, you didn't bring your Bible to How to Study the Bible. I walked in and that was the first thing I thought. I forgot my Bible, but luckily I accidentally had it in my bag.
Nice.
So that would have been worse if
I realized I was going to a church and I didn't have to turn around. If they had Bibles. All
right. So keep in mind what we're talking about right now is an explanation of this purpose statement. What I didn't get to print out for you guys, so I'll pass it around, is some verses, Piper. I included several sections of texts that show that that God's purpose is for us to see His glory in the Scriptures. And he breaks them down into sections. So like the first one is God's purpose for seeing His glory in predestination, which comes from Ephesians 1:3-6. Creation, the incarnation, propitiation, all those big words. Sin, sanctification, and consummation, which just means 6 different categories for all of the Christian life. Why did God choose us to follow Him and to give us faith? Ultimately, so here, I'll just read Ephesians 1:3-6 for you. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us in Christ with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places, even as He chose us in Him before the foundation of the world. So this is God choosing us before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless. In love, He predestined us for adoption as sons through Jesus Christ, according to the purpose of His will. So He predestined to adopt us according to His will, to the praise of His glorious grace, with which He has blessed us in the beloved. So that verse is saying the reason that He chose us, those who would believe, is ultimately for the purpose of His glorious grace. So all of these verses start with God's glory in those different categories, moves to God's aim for worship in all those different categories. We'll start with that. I share all of that because practically I have more resources from that page to show you. But so that, one, we don't have to take the time, which I will have that printed out for you next week. But we don't have to take time, but this is deeply rooted in those scriptures, in the Scriptures. This doesn't just come out on a whim. This is God's declared purpose for why we study the Bible. But what we're going to do now, are you guys, especially the Burtons, are you guys familiar with the DBS method that we did in India? I think you are.
Yeah, Stephanie actually started taking the kids through a DBS method of reading scripture. She did that with you guys last year. She was going to start another book with you this year about reading and explanation and stuff.
Okay. So does
I don't think they knew it was called that at the time, but that's what she was doing.
Can you just do a brief description for the video?
I'm going to, yeah. So when we were in India, per our missions agency, they had a method called DBS, Discovery Bible Study. The entire purpose of this method was how simply can we boil down what it takes to study the Bible? What is the simplest thing that we can do so that you can do it with a Christian, you can do it with someone who doesn't believe, you could do it with a mature or a new believer, all these things. So this was primarily the method that we taught in India because all it took was like 3 questions. So you would read the passage. Normally it's recommended that you read it 3 times. Then you'd summarize. The purpose of summarization is that when you're reading, you are paying attention to the actual words. You're not just reading passively, but you're trying to figure out what the meaning is, and you're trying to remember the text, because someone's going to get called on to summarize the passage. Then, it's the questions. Does anyone remember the questions?
What did you learn about them?
Yeah. More specifically, what did you learn about what?
This passage?
Yeah, it breaks it down into 2. What do we learn? What did you learn? It's what do you learn about God in the passage? What do you learn about man? And then the last question is, how will you obey? So you read, you summarize. So once you're familiar with the text, you're looking through the text trying to answer this question. What do we learn about God in this passage? Then, after you've exhausted that to whatever ability you have to exhaust it, you ask the question, what do we learn about man in this passage? And then, once that's concluded, you ask the question, okay, now how will you obey? And the point is that you would say something very time-bound and specific, like, I'm going to share this passage with 2 people on Tuesday. It's measurable. You can hold someone accountable to that. This is an okay method. It is good for the purpose that it was created, which is absolute simplicity, but it misses a few things. So, if you look at the paper, this one, that has the arrows at like the bottom half, the horizontal arrow, that, what did I call that? The resources page. If you look at the resources page, the first one, first resource that I suggest, I have it for you, it's called Asking the Right Questions. Super tiny book, like 150 pages, Asking the Right Questions. Right below it, right below the citation, I have the 8 questions that he recommends you ask every time you study the Scriptures. So it's 4 questions about, what's he call it, understanding the Bible, and 4 questions about applying the Bible. You'll notice from the very beginning, it's very similar to this, but it makes up for its weaknesses in a lot of ways. So you still ask, well, someone read out what those 8 questions are.
What do we learn about God? What do we learn about people? What do we learn about relating to God? And what do we learn about relating to people?
So those 4 questions are essentially these 2, just broken down a little bit further.
And under applying the Bible is, what does God want me to understand? What does God want me to believe? What does God want me to desire? And what does God want me to do?
Okay, so that last one, what does God want me to do, is this. But the reason that I said this is a bit weak is because it misses those first 3 in applying. Because it's possible that God wants you to see or understand something, and just simply saying, what are you going to do with this passage on Tuesday, is good, but what do we do with the fact that Philippians 2, 5 through 11 is this long poem or hymn about Jesus forsaking his authority as God and becoming a man and becoming a servant of men and dying on a cross and then being exalted to the right hand of God? Like, what do we do with that if our only conclusion is, how do I obey? We'll miss something. So these questions are much better, because you might ask the question, what does God want me to see in this? And the answer is, God wants you to see that Jesus gave up everything for you. And then ultimately, Paul's point is, so love the people in your church better, which is awesome. So we are going to use this and those 8 questions to now look at Isaiah 6. Okay? So let's look at Isaiah 6. We're going to read it once, because I think many of you are familiar with it, and for the sake of time. But like I said, I would normally recommend that you read it like 3 times. We're not going to summarize it. We're just going to start asking questions and looking at the text. So, does anyone want to read it? Okay, I'm going to read it. Alright, Isaiah 6. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, for I am lost. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of people with unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, Here I am, send me. And he said, "Go and say to this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn and be healed." And I said, "How long, my Lord?" And he said, "Until cities lie waste, without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is a desolate waste. And the Lord removes people far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. And though a tenth remain in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth or an oak whose stump remains when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump." All right. So let's ask these questions, those questions, and try to understand what's happening in this text and understand how it relates to our purpose statement here. So the first question, what do we learn about God in this text?
He's holy.
He's holy.
He has a throne.
Okay.
He's a king.
He's a king. His voice can shake things in the physical world.
Don't you shake things that filled this house with smoke.
He refers to himself as us.
For some strange reason, he uses a person to complete his mission.
He has a big robe.
He has a big robe.
He's the Lord of hosts.
I don't have thoughts on what hosts means. Chris Tomlin could help you on this one.
Okay.
Angel Armies
Angel
is the
Armies.
Chris Tomlin song.
Yeah.
Particularly it's armies, but yeah,
Oh,
might refer to angel armies or just a multitude of creatures or military. What else do we see about God here?
He's active. It's like 9 through 13. Pretty detailed description of judgment. Say he's a judge, but he's judging, it appears. But not without a way out. He just seems to, yeah.
It's okay if the answer is no, but do you know who he's talking about here? What's the context? Who are the people to whom these things will happen? In verses was it 9 through 13? Yeah, it's the nation of Israel. So this is God's chosen people. So God is allowing these awful things to happen to the people that He's chosen. if you think of more things about God, you're welcome to shout them out. We're going to move on to what do we learn about man? What do we learn about people here in this passage?
That he uses people.
God
To execute it.
Yeah.
That he's a man of unclean lips, but also he dwells among people with unclean lips.
So Isaiah, but not just Isaiah,
People.
his people, the Israelites, have unclean lips, which means what? Anybody can answer this? Yeah, they're sinful.
Or
Yeah. So people are sinful.
rebellious to God.
Maybe this is on the applying side, but I felt like it was substantial that there was a date stamp at the event.
Explain that. There's a date stamp.
The year King Uzziah died.
Mm.
I thought that was a vital piece of information to know. I guess that wasn't theoretical, this was a real event.
Okay, so David just broke away from our questions a little bit, but that's kind of what we want. We're just exploring the text. So the mention of this earthly king's death, why might that be in there?
To date it.
Hmm?
To date it.
Yeah, to make it real. I think it helps sometimes also understand the kind of passage you're reading. This poetry, this is law, and this is an event with a stamp on it, saying this happened.
Yeah.
This was real.
One thing I noticed when I was trying to prepare earlier today was, what's Uzziah's title?
King.
Yeah. And then look what Isaiah calls God at the end of verse 5.
King.
King. Lord of
Lord of
hosts.
hosts.
One king might have died. There's still a king.
It's always a king.
That's right.
Always has
Any other thoughts about what we learn about man here?
Basically, he's saying, have them listen, but, through my eyes or whatever. So because of past, I'm thinking because of everything that's happened up to this point, they've always rebelled and went the other way. After seeing all the miracles and signs and wonders, they still went by their own sight, heart, and he wants none of that. Let them hear, but basically with my spirit, I guess, I don't know.
Yeah, he says they're going to use their eyes, but they're not going to see. They're going to use their minds, but they're not going to understand.
Yeah. Keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive.
Yeah. So, what does this passage have to do with us seeing the glory of God, with the aim of being changed, the aim of joy, pleasure, with the aim of growing the health and size of God's church? But starting with seeing the glory of God, what does this passage have to do with it?
I think it actually gives a picture of the glory of God in the beginning. And then also his power in the end.
And specifically look at verse 3. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Why is that the message? Seraphim, it means burning ones. So these angels apparently appear to be on fire. These burning angels who are covering themselves. This is the song that they're singing, and this is the song that Isaiah records. Why? I'm not necessarily looking for a specific answer. I want you to use your brains and your hearts even.
For a proper description of what it actually looks like. Because up until then, nobody had
Well,
seen.
Why would it be important that a proper description of God's glory be happening here in this event, in this story?
I feel like you described it a little bit, or identifying that King Uzziah died. And from something we heard from the pulpit a few weeks back about King Uzziah, and one of the reasons he was probably mentioned is he was probably well known and loved, but he's gone. And yet, God is king. His description, I feel like, elevates him so far above mankind that helps us point our eyes away from an earthly king to a proper description of what a heavenly king is.
It's a great thought. We're seeing what a real king is. The real king. Something I've always wondered, you can wonder with me. I think I'm starting to see it, but this is chapter 6. Is this the beginning or the end of Isaiah's ministry? The very beginning, right? Like, this is his commission. This is him being sent out. But why doesn't that happen in chapter 1, verse 1? Like, we see that in Jeremiah. God calls him and says, I chose you before you were born. I think he said that was Jeremiah. Or I chose you from your youth or whatever. The very beginning. Why is this not happening in the beginning? This is speculation, so...
Just like in Genesis, in the beginning.
Yeah, why isn't this story in the very beginning? Isaiah's creation story, according to Kale. I don't know, but what I think is happening here is we're getting a bit of Isaiah's biography. Well, I know we're getting a bit of Isaiah's biography, and the result is it seems like he's just had a radical change of heart, because what's his response when he sees the glory of God?
Woe is me.
Woe is me. He's broken in a way that he doesn't seem to have been broken before. So here he is with his people. I mean, there's prophecies in the first 5 chapters, but we know very little about Isaiah or his purpose other than verse 1. This is the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amos. Like, we get Isaiah's background, but we know nothing other than this is just a vision and a prophecy that God has given to him. But here, 6 chapters in, God shows up. And Isaiah goes, oh crap. I'm done. I'm ruined. My people are ruined. It's not, yay, God is here to save us from the Assyrians. It's, I'm dead. I think specifically, where does he say destroyed? Where my notes are in this mess. Oh, there it is. When he says, woe is me, for I am lost, he's actually saying, woe is me, I was destroyed. Past tense. Like, he's already seen his death. He's dead. He knows it. But, what happens? Yeah, he lives. Why does he live? He should die when he sees the glory of God, when he sees God. Moses said, no man can see God and live. So why doesn't he die? You're minding something out, Caleb. You got thoughts?
The piece of coal,
The piece of coal, what does it do?
it took away Isaiah's guilt.
Yes! Read, what verse is it? Read the end of verse 7. What happens? What's the result of the coal touching Isaiah's lips?
And it touched my, behold, this has touched your lips, your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for.
Your guilt is taken away, your sin is atoned for. Somehow, Yahweh just paid the price for his sin.
With a piece of coal.
With a piece of coal. Something that should have probably ruined that tongue. Changes this dude's life and is the beginning of his ministry. So now we're gonna walk through. So I guess my point in saying that is the beginning of Isaiah's ministry is he first has to see the glory of God. He literally sees the glory of God. And then he savors it in a way that he's terrified. Like, he knows what this means. He's seen it, and now, oh crap. But then he's changed, transformed according to, I think it was point 4 in those blanks that we filled in. And then his commission is essentially to increase the health and size of God's church. Although it looks a lot uglier because God's saying you're going to preach to these people and they're not going to listen. They're not going to understand. All right, so let's go through what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. We're gonna think about this passage. So bear with me. Why don't you close your eyes? Okay. Now you're Isaiah, or you're with Isaiah or something, and you live in a war-torn country. And your people, for centuries, God's people, the people that you eat meals with, the people that you farm with, they have been rebelling against God for years. They have been building temples and fake gods to worship. And now, as God prophesied, nations are going to come in and take your country. And they're going to not just do that, they're going to leave it desolate, according to the Lord. And they're going to take God's people, your people, into exile, into a country that's not their own. And God starts prophesying about this in the book of Isaiah. And then we get here to chapter 6. And we're in the temple. So walk into the temple. We're seeing it's a 15 by 30 by 30 room. It's not too big. But this is the place of worship. This is the place only a few people can go. But we've been given the privilege because God is giving us this vision with Isaiah. And he sees God sitting on his throne. Is this a big God or a small God? This is a big God. Because the hem, the very smallest part of his robe fills this entire room. And he's sitting on his throne. And there's smoke, and there's these burning creatures, and they're covering themselves, and they're worshiping God, and they're saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is filled with his glory." And then you, with Isaiah, realize, oh, I've been an awful person. I don't deserve to be here with this God. Oh God, are you going to kill me right now? Just for seeing this? Woe is me. I'm a man of unclean lips. I remember the things that I've said. I remember the things that I've done, and I'm not worthy. I'm destroyed. I'm dead. I know it. And then one of these flaming ones, he's got salad tongs in his hand. He picks up a coal, and it's on fire. And gosh, that looks hot. What's he going to do with that thing? And he shows up, and he sits down right in front of me. Oh God, this is it. I'm dead. You're going to light me on fire? You're going to kill me like this? And he touches Isaiah's mouth. He touches her mouth. And something changes. Something breaks. And then, when the flaming being takes that tongue off your tongue, and you feel this rush through your whole body, you know something has changed, but he describes it to you. He says, this has touched your lips. Your guilt, your sin, it's gone, man. It's gone. Your sin, it's atoned for. Yahweh himself asked me to pay for it right now. He did it. It's gone. All right, open your eyes. And now Yahweh says, all right, who wants to go on a mission for me? What's the answer?
I'll do it.
I'll go! This is what we're talking about in seeing the Word of God. This situation with Isaiah. This is what we want every time we read the Scriptures, to be reminded, oh man, he's bigger than I thought. He's more powerful. I'm way worse. This is bad. Oh man, he's good. Oh man, look what he's done. Oh man, the glory of God, holy, holy, holy! This is awesome! How do I get to be a part of this? And then remember, he goes, all right, will you go for me? Will you say something to your friends for me? Yeah! I'm talking about this! I love this! I cannot believe you did this for me. I just got a crit. That's what we're talking about. Seeing the scriptures. And that's our goal. That's what this is going to amount to, Lord willing. That's what we're going to try to see each time. Okay? Alright. So, I have printed out that story. It should be the last page of what I printed out that you haven't looked at yet. Actually, before we get there, do you ever find what I'm talking about? It's called Professor Agassiz and
The fish.
And the fish.
the Fish. Yes. Oh, you're not. Okay, Agassiz. Yeah, you're right. Agassiz. I think I gave you a copy, right? Danielle? Did you give me a copy? Oh, sorry. I might, but I'll get there in a second. So, we are going to, in a minute, get into the practical side of this class. Oh, earlier than I thought, actually. Make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay. And so, again, I'll have this printed out for you next week. It was my hope to do it for this week. These 2 pages I'm going to show you. There are 2 titles in bold. And that's what we're going to be focused on for the next couple of minutes. The first one says study method, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And in parentheses, APTAT. This is Piper's acronym. APTAT. It's admit, pray, trust, act, thank. I'll explain it a little bit more in a second. But this is the method completely stolen from Piper that we're going to use to study the scriptures together every week. And this is the method that I will recommend. I'll actually send you that document so you have it this week as well. But this is what I'll recommend every time you open your Bible. Because it's awesome. The second page, the second title, I think it said, what's the second one in bold? Like, pray.
Pray before you study.
Pray before you study. And that's IOUs, or IOUS. Okay? So I'll look at that in a second. But, so it would be a branch of this. When you pray, this is the thing that you pray. So when you study, this is what you're doing. Like I said, this is going to be kind of an outline for what we do every week, every class. And again, part of what you didn't get printed out, I think, are the texts, the scripture texts that go along with each of these points. Like some of them have like 10 different scriptures that Piper uses to explain why this is the point that he suggests in studying the scriptures. But for now, we're just going to walk through what they are and what they mean so that we can use it practically and get into the practical side. So first is admit. And
Isaac, would it be possible for you to erase print board and write bigger?
Yeah.
Like, bigger than that.
What's that? I'm going to have to erase it each time. But admit. And it is admitting that without God, reading the Bible, it's not going to get you anywhere. It is entirely a supernatural work of the Spirit. And so we admit our weaknesses, we admit our sin. I don't know if you think of Isaiah 6. Woe is me, for I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of people with unclean lips. It's admitting that I don't even deserve to be reading this book. I wanted to spend part of this class going through the history of translation, but I won't because you could read it in a bunch of places. But the way that we have our English Bibles, the way that we even get to study, is on the backs, blood, and sweat of translators throughout history. Up through the 17th century AD, people were being murdered by the church for translating the Bible. And now we have an English Bible that, collects dust. I just read a story about a missionary. I was reading it last night, and he said this relief organization dropped a bunch of Bibles into a refugee camp consisting entirely of Muslims. And so they dropped in 10,000 Bibles. No people to help explain the scriptures, but they were trying. They were unsuccessful. The Muslim people took the Bibles, which they didn't understand, they just knew were antithetical to what they had been taught, and used them as sidewalk pavement, like to bridge spots that got walked a lot and there was mud, and for toilet paper. That should resonate something awful inside of you, because this is God's communication to His people from Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic, translated into Latin, translated into German, translated ultimately into English. Again, people getting killed for it. Like, this book, just in its existence, is powerful. And then in addition to that, the fact that the Holy Spirit communicates through that, it's crazy. So anyhow, the point is, admit that when you come to the Scriptures, we need God's help. We need that coal on our lips every time. And we need His interpretation, His help to understand it. So then the second thing, the P, you people in the back, is pray. That one should be fairly obvious. But again, now that you've admitted that without God you can do nothing, you pray to that effect. And so, did I get that sheet back that I passed around? Yeah. That's where the IOUs come in, or the IOUS, however you want to say it. And it's 4 things. So tell me if this gets confusing. We're breaking this down, just this letter P, into this acronym. I know that's a lot, but you tracking with me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The I is incline. And that comes from Psalm 119:36, where David says, "Incline my heart to your testimonies and not to selfish gain." So we've just admitted that we're selfish and sinful, and now, by praying this passage, we're asking God, shift my heart to your testimonies, to your word, not to my own sin, not to my own selfish gain. I don't want to do this just for me. I want to know your heart. And then after that is open. Comes from the same chapter, Psalm 119, verse 18. "Open my eyes that I may behold wondrous things out of your law." So you've admitted that you're a sinner in need of help. You're asking God to incline your heart to His testimonies and not to selfish gain. And now that your heart is inclined, your heart desires His testimonies, you're asking, okay, now I need you to open my eyes. I don't just want to see, what is it in Isaiah? They'll see and not, whatever. I don't want to just look and not see. I want you to open my eyes so that when I am looking, I see what you have for me in the Word. The third one is unite. Again, Psalm chapter 86, verse 11 says, Teach me your way, O Lord, that I may walk in your truth. Unite my heart to fear your name. So now you're asking for God to join your heart to His. And lastly, S is satisfy, one of my favorite verses in the Psalms, maybe in the Bible. Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, that we may rejoice and be glad all of our days. So you should be able to see this progression. We go from selfishness to understanding the heart of God, to seeing what he has for us in the Word, to uniting our hearts with his, and then ultimately satisfy us with your steadfast love, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. Okay? So, we're going to spend significant periods of time praying each class. Probably, longer than we normally would just for a class as evangelicals, but not as long as we could, because we want to really emphasize this point, that we are seeking for God to help us understand something that otherwise would be impossible. And that's crucial, because if you start trying to dig this on your own, we just struggle. Okay, so we did admit, we did pray. Everybody tracking so far?
Yeah.
Good? Okay. Yes, trust is next. On this list that you'll get, trust has the most verses, because the point of this point, I guess, is trusting in God's promises. Trust here, let me read a couple so that what I'm saying makes sense. Psalm 73, you guide me with your counsel, and afterward you will receive me to glory. So God guiding the psalmist, God guiding us, and eventually receiving us into his glory. That's a promise that we get to share. Isaiah 41, fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. 2 Corinthians 9:8, and God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times you may abound in every good work. These are some of the promises that God has allowed us through Jesus in the Scriptures. So what we're doing is trusting that after we've done these things, that he will do what he says in his Word, because he can, and he enjoys that. The fourth thing, which is the primary focus of this class, is act. And, I have been writing these. Trust. And act, oh my gosh, is specifically the action, the work of doing our part in studying the Scriptures. It's putting in the hard work. Alright, so fourth point, act. It's our job, our hard work, our blood, sweat, and tears into the actual act of studying the Scriptures. This is the one that we naturally focus on, and often forget these other important points. So the encouragement will be, even though we're focusing on this in the class, the encouragement will be, make sure you emphasize these other four in your study time. And then the last one is thank. I mean, getting to read about God and his Word, getting to be shown things that I just wrote one of the sections for Philippians last week, and I just couldn't understand the text. And conveniently, I was preparing for this class, so I'm walking myself through these steps, and then I did some diagramming and just tried to put in some serious work, and it was just good, man. I understood it. It was the craziest thing. I was like, I got to remember to get to step 5, which is thank, because I would have never seen this without God's intervention, the Spirit, showing me what's in his Word. So make sure you thank the Lord for not just his grace in us reading the Word, but the fact that we can breathe and have cars and eat without being concerned about our next meal, and just thank God, because that's part of our worship. So that being the APTAT being the study method, IOUs being the second point, how to pray. What was I leading into from this?
IOUS.
What?
IOUS.
IOUS. Even these we can sort of see we're in that Isaiah passage. We talked about this already. So Isaiah admitting that he was a man of unclean lips. Yeah, I think I mentioned that. And then kind of calling out to God, which could be seen as prayer. And then trusting, we don't really see it clearly in the text, but he had to trust that when the burning one said that your sin is atoned for, you're clean, that was true. And then his act was going to preach. I don't know if we see him, thank God or not, but I'm sure that he did. So this is an important method. We're going to follow that. The goal is every class when we study a passage. So now we are going to move on to. Let me make sure.
Psalm.
You want to read a psalm?
Proverbs.
Yeah, that's not true.
We're gonna read that Professor Agassiz story. Okay. So I'm gonna be the narrator. I'll read the bulk of it. You may notice. Well, I highlighted it in yellow. Does anyone have a yellow and pink highlighted copy? So it's here somewhere. Oh, there it is. Okay. So what I need is one person who's going to be Professor Agassiz and read. He was a Swede, so you got to do your best Swedish/German accent. Anybody up for it?
What was
Yeah,
the
Kara
accent
was interested.
again?
Oh, look, the yellow on my page, which doesn't show up on yours, is all of Professor Agassiz's lines. So it's not many. And if you don't want to do a German accent, you don't have to.
Wait,
We'll just think that you're more.
What's German accent again?
Someone give him an example of a German accent.
I was working on the Swedish one in my head.
Yeah, I was thinking the Swedish chef from Muppets.
I'm bad at accents. So like the third paragraph, he says, that is next best. So the German accent would sound something like,
That is next best.
yes! Was that a volunteer? Were you auditioning
Sure.
for the role of Agassiz?
Sure, I was working on it.
Okay. Alright, now we need someone.
The fish.
The fish doesn't have any lines in this play. Now we need someone to read the very few lines of the student. Who can do that?
Wait, where is it?
You don't have to. The highlighted ones are the student. So like this is the student talking. Do you have your other page? There's another one.
Vegan.
I can do it. No.
These ones are the student.
You want to highlight them?
Very last
I was
one.
gonna say
Tegan, did you take
orange
orange
ones show up.
Is this the
Yeah,
last one?
the orange ones show up. The yellow ones, I'm gonna
We
need that
only
one.
have
Yellow
one
one.
copy of the story.
Or one page.
No,
Is this
you
it?
get two. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yeah, that's the student's
That's
lines.
the last one?
But is that the last one? I don't know. Yeah,
It
but
barely.
Tegan's gonna do it.
Oh.
Okay, so I'll read the rest. Warm up your vocal cords. So this is a true story about a guy who went to study insects at the Harvard School of Entomology, I think. And there's a professor there whose name still, I think one of the sections is named after him because he was so influential in the role of the students as we're about to read.
Do I have to make a Swedish accent?
You don't have to, but you're more than welcome. He was an American student. We'll talk about what's in this story after we read it. Okay, here we go. Agassiz and the Fish by a student Tegan. It was more than 15 years ago that I entered the laboratory of Professor Agassiz and told him I had enrolled my name in the scientific school as a student of natural history. He asked me a few questions about my object in coming, my antecedents generally, the mode in which I afterwards proposed to use the knowledge I might acquire, and finally, whether I wished to study any special branch. To the latter, I replied that I wished to be well-grounded in all departments of zoology. While I wished to be well-grounded, I proposed to devote myself especially to insects.
When do you wish to begin?
He asked.
Now.
I replied. This seemed to please him, and with an energetic,
Very well.
he reached from the shelf a huge jar of specimens and yellow alcohol.
Take a fish
He said,
and look at it. We call it, I have no idea how to pronounce this word. a hemulon. By and by, I will ask you, have you seen?
I will ask.
Will,
I will
thank you.
ask if you
Thank
have
you for my
killed
correction.
With that, he left me. I was conscious of a passing feeling of disappointment, for gazing at a fish did not commend itself to an ardent entomologist. In 10 minutes, I had seen all I could see in that fish, and started in search of the professor, who had, however, left the museum. And when I returned, after lingering over some of the odd animals stored in the upper apartment, my specimen was dry all over. I dashed the fluid over the fish as if to resuscitate it from a fainting fit, and looked with anxiety for a return of a normal, sloppy appearance. This little excitement over, nothing was to be done but to return to a steadfast gaze at my mute companion. Half an hour passed. An hour. Another hour. The fish began to look loathsome. I turned it over and around, looked it in the face, ghastly, from behind, beneath, above, sideways, at a three-quarters view, just as ghastly. I was in despair. At an early hour, I concluded that lunch was necessary, so with infinite relief, the fish was carefully replaced in the jar, and for an hour I was free. On my return, I learned that Professor Agassiz had been at the museum, but he had gone and would not return for several hours. My fellow students were too busy to be disturbed by continued conversation. Slowly I drew forth that hideous fish, and with a feeling of desperation again looked at it. I might not use a magnifying glass. Instruments of all kinds were interdicted. That means not allowed. My two hands, my two eyes, and the fish. It seemed a most limited field. I pushed my fingers down its throat to see how sharp its teeth were. I began to count the scales in the different rows until I was convinced that this was nonsense. At last, a happy thought struck me. I would draw the fish. And now, with surprise, I began to discover new features in the creature. And just then, the professor returned.
That is right,
said he.
A pencil is one of the best eyes. I'm glad to notice too that that you keep your specimen wet and your bottle corked.
With these encouraging words, he added,
Well, what is it like?
He listened attentively to my brief rehearsal of the structure of parts whose names were still unknown to me, the fringed gill arches and the movable operculum, the pores of the head, fleshy lips and lidless eyes, the lateral line, the spinous fin, the forked tail, the compressed and arched body. When I had finished, he waited, as if expecting more. And then, with an air of disappointment,
You have not looked very carefully. Why?
He continued more earnestly.
You haven't seen one of the most conspicuous features of the animal, which is as plainly before your eyes as the fish itself. Look again! Look again!
And he left me to my misery. I was piqued. I don't know. I was mortified.
Weak.
Still more of that wretched fish? But now I set myself to the task with a will, and discovered one new thing after another, until I saw just how the professor's criticism had been. The afternoon passed quickly, and when, towards its close, the professor inquired,
Do you see it yet?
No.
I replied,
I'm certain I do not, but I see how little I saw before.
That is next best.
he said earnestly.
But I won't hear you now. Put away your fish and go home. Perhaps you will be ready with a better answer in the morning. I will examine you before you look at the fish.
Oh, this was disconcerting. Not only must I think of my fish all night, studying without the object before me, what this unknown but most visible feature might be, but also, without reviewing my new discoveries, I must give an exact account of them the next day. I had a bad memory, so I walked home by Charles River in a distracted state with my two perplexities. The cordial greeting from the professor the next morning was reassuring. Here was a man who seemed to be quite as anxious as I that I should see for myself what he saw.
Do you perhaps mean
I asked.
that the fish has
Symmetrical.
symmetrical size with paired organs?
His thoroughly pleased,
Of course, of course!
repaid the wakeful hours of the previous night. After he had discoursed most happily and enthusiastically, as he always did, upon the importance of this point, I ventured to ask what I should do next.
Oh, look at your fish!
He said, and left me again to my own devices. In a little more than an hour, he returned and heard my new catalog.
That is good, that is good!
He repeated.
But that is not all. Go on.
And so for 3 long days, he placed that fish before my eyes, forbidding me to look at anything else, or to use any artificial aid.
Look, look, look!
Was his repeated injunction. This was the best entomological lesson I ever had. A lesson whose influence was extended to the details of very subsequent study. A legacy the professor had left me, as he left it to many others, of inestimable value, which we could not buy, with which we cannot part. The fourth day, a second fish of the same group was placed beside the first, and I was bidden to point out the resemblances and the differences between the two. Another and another followed until the entire family lay before me, and a whole legion of jars covered the table and surrounding shelves. The odor had become a pleasant perfume, and even now the sight of an old 6-inch worm-eaten cork brings fragrant memories. The whole group of Hamulons was thus brought into review, and whether engaged upon the dissection of the internal organs, preparation and examination of the bony framework, or the description of the various parts, Agassiz's training in the method of observing facts and their orderly arrangement was ever accompanied by the urgent exhortation not to be content with them.
Facts are stupid things,
He would say,
until brought into connection with some general law.
At the end of 8 months, it was almost with reluctance that I left these friends and turned to insects. But what I gained by this outside experience has been of greater value than years of later investigation in my favorite groups. He actually, in another version of this story, tells about how he and his friends would doodle on the chalkboard when they were bored, and every time he drew this fish in perfect detail. So why do we read that story? What's the importance of the story?
Teaches us that even though we're not looking enough.
Yeah. And to keep looking. Look at your fish. That's going to be a repeated command throughout this course. Look at your fish. Because there's more. This is God's word. He's teaching us. If that man could learn so much from a stupid fish, we can learn infinitely more from an infinite God and His Word as He teaches us how to understand it. So, if I'm remembering correctly, yes, without further ado, we are going to look at our
Proverbs.
first fish. Yes, at Proverbs.
The big fish.
So, take out your Bibles. Proverbs 6. Proverbs 6, 16 through 19. So what do we do first?
Okay, leave 150.
This is your first quiz. What do we do first? Now that we're opening the Bible.
Read it, admit it.
Yes, we're going to do APTAC. We will get there, Tegan. We are remembering Proverbs 6, verse 16 to 19. We are remembering that we don't deserve to be here with this book. But God has been gracious, and not only does He allow it, He wants it. He wants us to understand Him more. He wants us to see His glory more. He wants us to wonder and savor and enjoy and be changed and help others to do the same. Okay? So have that in your mind. What do we do next?
Right.
We're going to pray. So, I will... The recommendation is to pray the IOUs or the IOUSs, as Kale would enforce. It's the idea. You don't necessarily have to pray the texts, and because we only have one copy, it will be hard to do that. But I'm going to set it here. You can pass it around as we're praying. The point is, what we're doing is we're asking God to remove distractions. We're asking God to teach us. We're asking God to open our eyes to see things. And ultimately, we're asking God to satisfy us with His steadfast love. So we're going to spend a short period of time praying. There's going to be very little order to it. If you want the paper, you have it right, Tegan? Mm-hmm. If you want the paper that Tegan has that has those IOUS verses on it, raise your hand maybe, and well, I don't know if you guys pray with your eyes open or if you're too holy for that, but you can figure out a way to get that paper. But what we're going to do is just have an open time with these thoughts in our minds of just kind of popcorn praying. And then after a few minutes, I'll close this out. I'll say we're done after the closing prayer because I want to also have multiple opportunities to pray. So it might get weird and silent for a time, but that's okay. We're praying to God, acknowledging all these things, but also for the encouragement of one another. So, yeah, let's pray. God, I had a lousy day today. And now the second time that I've read through Isaiah 6, I'm so thankful that you have reminded me of first my brokenness, but also my state before you. Imagine what it would have been like to be Isaiah, to feel that cold touch his lips and to know the symbolism behind it. And I'm thankful, God, that you did the same thing. You made a way to do that through your son, Jesus. That burning coal touching his lips was, as Psalm 2 says, what it's like for us to kiss the Son, to show honor to your Son who sacrificed for us. And so now, as we study, but also for the next 7 weeks or 6 weeks, depending on if people come to the last class, we need your help, Lord. We need you to do for us in our hearts and in our minds what we can't do on our own. We need you to do the impossible and teach us, who are not naturally smart or wise, your word. And we thank you, knowing and trusting that you'll do that, because of the connection you've given us with Jesus. That means that we get to inherit the blessings that you give to him and through him. And so we know that you will help us, and we're thankful for that. We thank you for that.
God, I ask for humility as we I just look over in the corner of the room and I see a stack of Bibles. And it's easy to sometimes take for granted the words printed on a page, as we have so many books. It's a challenge to remember the power behind your word when we read it. Help our hearts understand and be prepared as we open your word and study it, that the words are food for our eternal soul. You've laid them out for us to encourage us, to help us to be willing to receive that. Unlike any other book in existence, help us not to think like we're reading a novel or something for entertainment, but we're reading your living and active word. Help it nourish us.
Lord, I keep thinking of Psalm 16, which says, in your presence there's fullness of joy, and at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. Would you give us that in your word? No, we know that you've given us that in your word. Would you help us to remember that and to feel that as we study your word? to help us like hunger for that in the way that we would hunger for food or thirst for water, to experience your eternal pleasure and the fullness of joy. Oh, I've had some times where I am unhappy, even recently. Would you give me the fullness of your joy in your word?
Holy Spirit, I ask that you would show us your word. I ask that you would show us what you want us to see. It says it's alive and sharper than any two-edged sword. And Holy Spirit, I'm just asking that you would make it that as we read through it each time.
Lord, I think of the message that you commissioned Isaiah to declare to your people, that they would see and not understand and hear and not perceive. And I think that it wasn't long after this that you prophesied your own coming new covenant, where you would write your law on our hearts and write them on our minds. And that if we could break the Son's covenant with the dawn, then we'd be able to break your new covenant through the blood of Jesus. And so we thank you that it is an unbreakable covenant, that you give us everything we need to restore our relationship with you, to remove our sin, and ultimately to bring your people to perfection, which is not something we do, but something we trust for you to do. So help us play a small role in that through this class today and this class for the next several weeks. We ask for your great glory to be revealed to us, that we would understand the important value of worship, that we would see, but not just see, that we would savor your glory, your goodness, your excellence, your beauty, your worth, and that we would be transformed, and that we would be involved in the church of Christ being completed in beauty and number, so that one day we get to see those seraphim saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory," saying, "Worthy is the Lamb to take the scroll." God, thank you for that great privilege. Help us today. Help us this week. Help us in the coming weeks. In Jesus' name, amen. We're done. Okay, so we just have a couple minutes. We're studying Psalm 6, verses 16 to 19. That's going to be our homework tonight. But for the next couple of minutes, we're gonna kind of break the seal and figure out where do we go. So let's start by reading it. Who wants to read it for us? Did you raise your hand? Okay, got it.
16 to 19.
16 to 19.
There are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, A heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers.
All right. So we're going to look at our fish. What was Professor Agassiz's first commendation, his first recommendation to the student, if you remember? Or
Look
more
at it
practically,
close.
what should we do? How do we look at it closer? What did he say was the best? This is working for. Yes, pencil and a paper. So,
Best
first steps
eyes,
in doing your
pencil, and
homework.
pencil.
What did you say?
Best eyes, pencil, and paper.
Yes, something like that. Yeah. So we're gonna write it. Conveniently, I have it already written, but you're gonna write it on a piece of paper that you're gonna use the rest of this week to look at your fish. So.
I like my fish.
You have your fish, is that what you said?
I like my
Oh,
fish.
you like your fish? Alright, well, hopefully you get to the point where,
You love your fish.
and hopefully not to the point where it smells disgusting.
Gotta get it wet again.
Yeah.
Go on lunch break. Come back.
The goal is to be able, 10 years from now, be able to draw it just as clear as it is.
Which I do have stories about that. Next week, once we finish this text, we'll have
Do you
to
want me
tell
to
the
hold
stories. No, it's fine. So write it out. And while you're writing it, if you see any observations, anything you think, shout it out.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to write on the other side of the paper.
What do you want us to shout out?
Just anything that you see that you think might be pertinent.
And the numbers are confusing.
The numbers are confusing. Why are they confusing?
6 and 7
6 and a 7.
in one way.
Those are two different numbers. I'm no mathematician, but those aren't equal. Yeah, these observations can be unanswered, maybe even unanswerable questions, or something that you like, something that you don't understand, anything like that. This passage was intentionally chosen because if you spend enough time in this passage, you will inevitably go, there's nothing more here, and then you'll find more.
What is technically an abomination?
That's a great question. I'm not going to answer it, but
Are we still shouting out?
yeah, sure.
Or is kind of like a body parts theme?
Body parts. So we can start with, some of you are still writing, but nonetheless, we can start with answering or attempting to answer the first question. It says 6, it says 7. What's the answer? How many are there?
7.
There's 7. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Because it starts with 6 and then goes to 7, and then there's how many other numbers listed.
7.
So for me, I wrote this list out, which is too late for you now, maybe, but I wrote this list out as a list so that I could answer the question, is it 6 or 7? It doesn't fully answer the question, we'll talk about that more later, but that's a helpful way to do it. This is actually a simplified version of diagramming. Just broke the sentence into its different pieces. So there are 7. What else are we looking at? Look at your fish. What else do you see?
Seems limited.
Seems limited. Why limited?
Not limited to just an individual's behavior. Single person, how he treats other people. So it's like person-to-person relationships.
Call that P2P relationship.
Very.
Two of them kind of seem the same, so what's actually different?
Which two?
Lying tongue, a false witness who breathes out lies.
Ooh, interesting. Maybe that plays into the 6v7. Oh boy.
Yeah.
So there's lying tongue in number 2. There's lies in number 6. So maybe this is a list of 7 things that's actually a list of 6 things.
Well, could you categorize as a lying tongue, you know, someone who just lies about everything? Like, you know, no, this room's not blue, it's pink. But if I'm a false witness, I'm testifying about something that's not true. I'm testifying a lie.
Okay, so there's a bit of a nuance.
Yeah,
So
no, it's not raining outside.
It might not be anymore.
Right.
Alright, so this is what we're going to do all week. Okay? So what I want you to do is to have, yes, stare at your fish.
I am
Have
staring at
this-
my Bible, not my fish.
Have this passage in front of you all week. The goal is minimum an hour, maximum 168 hours. We want to look at this fish as much as possible, okay? You don't have to necessarily come to any conclusions, but keep going through that APTAT process, the IOUs, keep asking the Lord for help, keep doing the hard work. That 4th point, the A, is acting, doing the hard work of looking at your fish and seeing what's there, okay? Remember that the student in the story, which is, again, a true story, within the first 30 minutes, he saw all he could see about that fish. And then he drew it, and he saw more. And then, you know, he was seeing more and more. So keep looking at your fish, and let's come back next week, and we're going to discuss it. I don't know what we're going to do for the people that weren't here. Maybe we'll just have an extended discussion time on this so that they can catch up. But yeah, look at your fish, okay? Any questions? All right, see you next week. Thanks, everybody. And I'll have your papers for you.